John Vivanco has been a professional remote viewer for 25 years and has gained highly accurate results on targets that have both pleased corporate and government clients and antagonized government agencies that don't want a civilian-run remote viewing organization to be successful. He is the co-host of Metaphysical on Rise TV, and he applies his remote viewing tools to different ancient mysteries and UFOs.
You are listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Well, welcome back, John, to Exopolitics Today.
It's good to be here, Michael. It's really great to see you. I love your background, Florida.
Yes.
Good.
Florida's nice, and a lot's happened. I mean, the last time you were on the show was in July, and I know you do this metaphysical show on Rise TV with Rob Counts, and there's a lot of really interesting projects and episodes that you do with that. So, you want to tell us a little bit about that show and Rise TV?
The show was we've been doing it now for I think it's 2 years at this point. And we do weekly, typically weekly, podcast style, trying to get into like a higher production quality in some of these as well. And we're just moving metaphysical as sort of this umbrella for doing a lot of different things. So we're starting to also interview people, which I think we've already interviewed 2 people at this point, and those will be fed onto the channel as well. But a lot of it has to do with finding weird, interesting topics, remote viewing them, Rob talking about them through his own research, and then me presenting remote viewing data on some of these things. And we run a lot across a lot of weird stuff, a lot of stuff that people have never touched before. And the show, because it's based on remote viewing data, we tend to open up the stories a heck of a lot more than if other people are doing them on YouTube or books or whatever. So yeah, it's a fun show.
Right. Well, one of your recent episodes, you focused on these cedar beings that appear after cataclysms to really be part of this kind of cycle of birth and death, that these advanced extraterrestrial beings are kind of like seeding genetics. And that's interesting because there've been a few people that have talked about extraterrestrials being part of this organization, and some are described as Cedars. So you want to tell us about the Cedars?
Yeah, that's a lot of people will think of the Anunnaki when people talk about seeding beings. Now, like in remote viewing, we don't get names of things. We only get descriptions. We don't viewers don't automatically say, oh, Anunnaki, right? And even if they did say it, it would be this sort of like a analytical overlay or a deduction that they came to based off of low-level information. And so we always stay very low-level information. And so what we get with these beings is not just descriptions of what people consider the Anunnaki, but descriptions of other beings as well, from feline type to blue beings to human-like beings to even reptile-like beings. Because what we've seen is that a certain point in the civilization of any type of being, when they get to a certain point, they become more and more interested in how to create new renditions of themselves and other things, not just that, of beings to evolve on a planet, but also other life forms, plant forms, taking stuff from one planet to another planet because they know that it'll work out well on that planet. And so these beings, they tend to come in together as somewhat of a consortium after we have, at least on Earth, major cataclysms happening. And we know these cataclysms happen, looking at ice cores, and geology, that these cataclysms happen approximately every 12,000-ish years, the big ones on this planet. So there's this big cycle. And there's a cycle that they watch, the cycle that they manage, and then they come back in and create something new. You know, it was like, for instance, when we were looking at, this might throw a lot of people off, and I'm sorry about this, but when we were looking at Adam and Eve, for instance, we literally task on that scenario, and what we have, literally what we have is a lab. We have like a lab-like situation with these cedar-type beings trying to create new forms, right? And I know that would throw a lot of people off, but you know, the remote viewing data is the remote viewing data. So very interesting.
Now, with the Adam and Eve and the lab, was that lab on Earth or on a ship? Because I've heard both.
Both. It's both. Yeah. Primary. So it's like the beginning point is on a ship, and then the testing phase is bringing it down to an Earth-based lab that's sort of like a walled garden in a sense. In fact, you know, when you get into the idea of the Garden of Eden, the data surrounding that was like just like a walled garden, basically, that these beings were put into and living and being and learning how to be what they are at that point in time.
Mm-hmm. So could you just explain a little bit about the difference between the Cedars and the seed races? And an example that comes to mind for me is having read about these Alteans that are supposed to be an extraterrestrial civilization from another galaxy, and that they were the ones that seeded the Atlantean civilization. So yeah, can you just explain that difference?
Right. So that the Cedars are genetically manipulating various species with their own DNA and other DNA in order to create an offshoot of a race that would be somewhat related to them. And those beings, they don't always, the ones that are seeded don't always recognize that they were seeded. They don't always recognize that they are connected to these other beings that put them here through genetic manipulation. And in the case of us, we'll often refer to them as the gods, the ones that created, the creators. There is a creator, right? I mean, there is this overall idea of a creator, but then below that, it's like the Elohim type situation where you have these beings who are considered gods, right? By the humans, the ones that have been seeded, as opposed to the real recognition of the story in that they are the ones that have very, 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 very intense, broad and structured knowledge of genetics and how to create these types of things. So, yeah. We are, you know, as a human race, you know, ultimately we want to move towards that. You can see that, right, with our genetic manipulation and learning, because that's just like this natural outcome. You know, this is the interesting too. It's like when we were talking, I think we were talking last time about the Antarctica some stuff in Antarctica. And there was a story that came from Linda Moulton Howe of this Delta Force, I think it was a Delta Force guy or a Navy SEAL or something, that was a whistleblower who claimed that he was sent to this, him and a team was sent to this thing that was sticking out of the snow. They were able to get inside of it. It was like this ship, and inside of it had all of these designs on the wall, right? And if you remember this story, I don't remember where it was presented, but it was originally Linda Moulton Howe who presented the story. I think it might have been on Ancient Aliens, in fact. So we actually had an episode on that particular thing on Metaphysical, where it was talking about that. And that thing was related to a group of beings who were more reptile-like. And what they were doing was that those things were numerous across the earth and put in different locations in order to read genetic frequencies of everything around them. Because that race specifically was interested in finding unique genetic signatures that they could use and incorporate into their race, right? So a lot of these races will take it different ways. Some races will be Cedars, some will be races who want to enhance themselves for more power and more control. And we actually have a lot of that kind of stuff that's happening on this planet and have had for a long time.
Now, one of the things that I've been told is that when the Cedar races arrive and they set up a new civilization, that they leave behind one of their ships or a space ark that can be used both as giving the kind of technological impetus for that civilization to be birthed and grow, and
Right.
also to be used in the case of an emergency to evacuate, the elite and whoever else is they deem worthy.
And I've not heard that before, but yeah, I mean, I can imagine. So, I mean, I imagine that there's probably a lot of technology from that stuff that's just left behind, buried somewhere under the earth, under the ground. Yeah.
Mhm. Now, you examine these pictographs of the Anunnaki carrying these seed bags.
The bag. So
And
yeah,
that's, yeah,
the
yeah.
bag.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So there's always been a question as to what that bag is about, that and the low relief glyphs that the Anunnaki is carrying. So when we task on, I know I've tasked on it a number of times. I've also used it just for like regular student taskings, right? Not just professionals, but the people I teach. And so, I've probably tasked on this. I probably tasked on it 20, 30 times, something like that, because I'll just send it out as a practice target. And it always comes back as the representation of the bag that carries civilizations in it. So that bag is the representation of the seeds that these beings carry from planet to planet. Ultimately, that's what it is. It's actually quite simple too.
Right. Now, with that particular pictograph, I mean, the Anunnaki, which I believe is Enki, is also in his right hand carrying an acorn, which represents, I guess, the third
The
eye.
third eye, yeah.
Yeah. So, and I guess, and there's a kind of debate out there, about, well, was Enki, like, there seems to be this sibling rivalry between Enki and Enlil. Enki was the geneticist. Enlil was the space commander. Enlil
Mhm.
bad, he caused the catastrophes. Enki good because he was helping seed humanity and genetically upgrading them and all of that. So, yeah, what do you know about the acorn, Enki, and his role in kind of like seeding humanity?
So when we look at the acorn has to do with what you said, the third eye, but more. The third eye would be a metaphorical representation of the spiritual growth of the civilization. So ultimately, their intention is the spiritual growth, at least in these glyphs, in these low reliefs, is the spiritual development of the civilization to open their third eye. Ultimately, is what it means. When you get to the conflict between the two. So we've seen this in remote viewing data where there was a conflict between the two, and I don't remember like which one was more benevolent than the other one, but one was definitely on the side of wanting to create sort of a slavery type situation, and one of them was more on the side of wanting the third eye type situation, the race to ultimately enlighten, to understand what they truly are. But I don't remember which one was which. But it shows up in remote viewing data. Always shows up in remote viewing data.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's confirmation then that Enki was the one that was really involved in the kind of like the enlightenment of humanity, and the
Right.
acorn, the pineal gland. So
Right.
he's generally regarded as the positive, the benevolent uh, Anunnaki Lord or God.
Right.
Whereas there are a few who say that, oh well, and it was Enlil, and they kind of associate him more with this kind of Yahweh, God of thunder and justice, and
Right.
vengeful behavior if you don't do what
Right.
you're
Right.
supposed to do, like a
Yeah,
Yahweh.
I mean, the Yahweh is a very interesting being, and we actually do have a lot of crossover when we look at Yahweh with other more wrathful type beings. I'm kind of like coming to the conclusion with these more with Yahweh, the Enki Enlil characters, as well as the other mythological type gods, that they weren't mythological. There's a reality, a physical reality to them. And a lot of them are sort of an amalgamation of each other, or they are an aspect of the character of that particular god, right? And so what we find that, like with Yahweh, for instance, when we look into that being, we can also look at another being where viewers will talk about, and I can't remember which one. I wish I had this on hand here, but I can't remember which one. Where viewers will say maybe it's like one of the Norwegian gods, where that's another aspect of that particular god. It's like a personality side or an aspect side or a fractal, or it's just it doing something different, right? Odin, for instance. Some of the Japanese gods as well. We will have this relationship in the data between Yahweh, and that was the Japanese interpretation of this particular being, right? So it's really interesting how all these things cross over. It's like comparative history or comparative mythology, where different cultures had an experience with one being, and they portrayed it in these different ways, and it would act in different ways towards each different culture.
You also analyze one of the glyphs featuring Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, and there again we see that the
Another
cedar
aspect
bag.
of Yahweh. That's actually something that would show up in the data, would be this other aspect of Yahweh. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
really? Okay.
Yeah.
So, so there you have that glyph. You have the cedar bag. You know what seems to be like
Same thing.
an astronaut in a craft, and then you have a dragon. So,
Right.
yeah, you want to unpack that for us?
Well, well, interestingly enough, like there have been a lot of people out there who have who have scholars, like biblical scholars and other people have gone, wow, a lot of the descriptions of Yahweh seems very dragon-like, where there are some descriptions of Yahweh as being a dragon. And if you go back to Mount Sinai and what people around there used to worship before Moses was they worshiped a dragon god or a volcano god, and that god later turned into Yahweh, right? And so we find this as well with other glyphs, like what you're seeing here right now of a dragon, and when we remote view it, it's got the aspects of Yahweh to it, right? And it's got the seed bag, and also it's either Enlil or Enki, who is also related to the Yahweh construct or the Yahweh character. So this is all the same thing, and all this stuff came about at a time when the Earth was being reseeded, basically when it was being reseeded. So, yeah.
It truly is fascinating. Now, the Enlil is the one that is typically associated with the Yahweh character, and I believe he had his own separate genetic program because once he figured out that his half brother or Enki was trying to come up with this more evolved human, that Enlil wanted the slave version, so he got his own geneticist to kind of like. So you almost have like two strands of genetic experiments happening there.
Right.
So you have also the generally speaking, the gods are creating these Cedars are creating these genetic experiments all over the planet.
Yeah.
And so as they travel to different parts of the planet, whether it's Japan, China, the Americas, Europe, Australia, I mean, what kind of different genetics were they carrying?
I don't know. I don't know what kind of different genetics they were carrying, but I do know that there was a focus to create different characteristics within different areas of the planet because of the idea that if you had a planet with really just one race, things will get pretty boring genetically. But if you mix things between continents with very specific genetic structures, when these people find each other and they start to make babies, you get other things going on. So what you also have here in part is this sort of evolutionary experiment where you have aspects of different genetics and cultures across the universe that are placed into different races on this planet. And the whole intention is to create this situation where you see what new things can be created when you put them together. It's all a work of art. It's all a creative expression. And that is in part also what they meant for this and meant about it.
Who were the Olmecs? Were they one of the cedar races, or were they a seed race?
They were a seed race. Yeah. As far as I know, they were a seed race. They were one of the first ones in the South American side, or the Mexico, South. I don't remember exact, Peru, maybe, somewhere in that region. They were one of the first ones. And that one, we literally traced back to Mars. So when Mars went through its cataclysm, they had brought some of these people that were there to this planet and set them up as a civilization. I mean, when you get to the gate, the sun gate, the gate of the sun, Pumapunku, when you get to those constructions were they're very old constructions, and those are related to the very first construction that happened here under the hand of the gods, so to speak. Because when we view that, and we view like who built it, how did they build it, we always get aliens. We always get these aliens who transported others to this location. And it's a simple geologic, or it's a simple like architectural question that we ask all the time when we look at structures, or if we're looking at geology, right? It's a very simple question. It typically doesn't require, nor does it like ever go down the path of people talking about aliens constructing something. But when we get to these old structures, we have a lot of them under the supervision, at the very least, of a seed race. And so Pumapunku, for instance, has those aspects to it. And the Olmecs were the ones that they were like directing. And the Olmecs knew that they were connected to these beings that brought him here, because, you know, it was just after it happened, part of their understanding, and wasn't something that was hidden from them. That particular thing has happened over a long period of time, that degradation and hiding of this history from the human race.
Now, I know you have also done remote viewing of the ancient Vedic civilization, and you came up with something that I hadn't come across before, which was that the Mahabharata, the events surrounding that, actually took place before the Great Flood, as opposed to, I think, the conventional view is that it happened around 4,000 years ago or something like that. But you think it happened 12,000 years ago. So, tell us what happened. So
the reason why I think that is 12,000 years ago is because the and this is actually gets kind of complicated as far as like cycles go. The Hindus, the Indians, have the yugas, and the yugas are very disputed on their time frames, right? And there are 4 yugas, right? There's the Kali Yuga, which we're in right now, which is the darkest age. There is the Bronze Age. The Greeks also have it too. So the Greeks have the ages. There's actually 30 cultures across the whole world who have some rendition of 4 to 5 ages. It's typically 4. And the ages in every other culture last 12,000 years. Now, in the Vedas, in the yugas, they have been disputing the length of the yugas. But the yugas follow exactly what the other cultures across the planet describe as the time length. It's the same thing, right? There have been some studies and research that I've been following that place each yuga as 12,000 years, right? The Mahabharata happened just before the flood, right? And that was 12,000 years ago. So in the Mahabharata, Krishna had spoken of a flood that was coming. I think it was in the Mahabharata. a great flood was coming and that he would have to leave Dwarka. He would have to leave Dwarka. Everybody thought Dwarka was a mythological city. And there is a Dwarka on land currently right now, but that's the new Dwarka. They found out in the sea, a couple miles away, a whole underwater city that was actually where Dwarka was. According to the Mahabharata, that was actually where Krishna lived. So that city got flooded out, and that is when he left, and that was the turn of the age. And he had spoken about this at the turn of the age for the Kali Yuga, he would have to be leaving here. So this is basically why I believe that the Mahabharata happened just pre-flood, ultimately pre-flood, in the last previous age. And now we're at the end of the Kali Yuga. Kali Yuga, according to the calculations that I'm running up against, ends actually in 2025. Now, it doesn't mean anything's going to happen necessarily, but it just means that this big epochal age is ending at this moment in time.
Yeah, that's pretty compelling. That city found off the coast of Dwarka that could well be that mythological Dwarka described in the Mahabharata.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah, that would suggest that whatever led to its sinking happened during the time of the Mahabharata, and that, so that would support it happening before the Great
Well, I
Flood.
mean, I don't have remote viewing. It's really difficult to get remote viewing data on time frames. So this is basically based off of my research and my understanding of things rather than, and my deductions rather than like any remote viewing data on time frames on this. But I truly believe that happened just before, and we're now in 2025 at the end of the Kali Yuga. So.
Well, when we're talking about Vedic India, I mean, there are these images of these blue beings, and some of them have multiple arms. So you want to tell us about what you saw in the Vega
wild.
star system?
Okay, I mean, that's wild because, so this is the craziest thing. So this was years ago. I was out in my backyard with some friends, and we were just watching the sky with night vision, right? And this thing kept flashing up in the sky, and then it would stop. It would flash in the sky, and then it would stop. We go, what is that? We all kept seeing it. We couldn't figure it out. So, and it happened night after night. And so I was like, okay, we're going to have to like figure out what this is and remote view it. So I will do a technique with viewers, running them blind, where, and I will also view it as well, where we will go in as a group, and it's kind of like a Minority Report, like where they have the precogs in the tank, and the precogs are like describing this scene and describing stuff. So we will often go in like that, and it actually produces really, really cool and accurate data, and it also gives viewers a very deep experience that's a little bit different than like the paper sessions. And so when we were viewing this, what we saw was a planet. And because we're trying to understand what this light was, this light was showing up right where Vega is, right near Vega in our night sky, right? So what we saw was a planet there. And we go into it and we see these very tall blue beings, with some of them had multiple arms. And it was me, it was 3 other viewers who are all describing these beings. And they had, when you remote view this stuff, these types of beings will recognize that you're there, and they will begin to like probe you and interact with you a bit. So what we saw there on that planet around Vega was that there were these beings that had multiple arms. Some of them did, some of them didn't. They were very tall. They looked like all of the Hindu type gods portrayed throughout their history and their culture. And they were specifically related to that world in that time. So they were specifically working with, influencing, and also part of the process of growth, not just that, but seeding before that, growth of that particular civilization. And they are mostly from this region right around Vega. And that was like a very interesting and weird rabbit hole that was very, very unexpected.
Okay, so the Vedic civilization were likely seeded by this Vega
Yeah.
world where these blue beings
Yeah.
were the Cedar race.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. And,
fascinating.
we had also looked at various things about their culture and what happened, because, for instance, they have an asteroid belt there. And actually, that system, the Vega system is where contact occurs. You know the movie Contact, right? The Vega system has been a very interesting system to astrobiologists who look at it and say, hey, that looks a lot like ours. There's planets there that would have life, that could have life on it, where we could survive. And they have an asteroid belt just like ours. One of the curious things about that asteroid belt is that when we looked at that particular belt and on how it formed, we had a planet that was destroyed, exploded. And it was exploded in a way that looked very much like nuclear weapons that destroyed that thing. And then when you get to Mohenjo-daro in India, and a story in the Mahabharata about a war that occurred there, they have found a glass surface on that city that could only happen if there was very, very high heat. And in the Mahabharata, I think that was the city where the Brahmastra, which is some type of like spiritual godlike weapon, destroyed it, right? And so now what they find is like, well, it's glassed over. Like even some of the structures are glassed over with a green glass that only occurs with a nuclear explosion. So this has raised a lot of, question on what happened there. So what I think happened, based off of the data that I've seen on this, is that they had brought some weaponry with them, right? And some of this was likely used during that time.
Fascinating. Now, you talk in another episode of the Maya civilization coming from Mars. So, yeah, you want to tell us, about the data, the results from the remote viewing you did on the Maya and their origins.
Yeah, that was like, there's a couple of them down there. The Maya, the Olmec. In our solar system, it seemed that there was a massive cataclysm that occurred, and our asteroid belt was formed when there was some type of planet in that area, right? A lot of that debris got sucked into Jupiter's gravity field and just pulled into that planet, and so our asteroid belt is very sparse. But during that whole situation, Mars was also in trouble, and there were so when you look at Mars and you look at the face on Mars, you look at some of the pyramidal type structures on Mars, very, very enticing images. When we remote view those things, we describe a race of beings that are like more brown skin, red skin, shorter, black hair, very tribal-like culture that had access to other beings. Like for them, their life was like, it was understanding that there are other beings in the solar system at the very least, and interaction with them. And their culture had developed over a very long period of time. It was a tropical place too, like at least where the face on Mars was, which is a structure. It's an actual structure where the face on Mars was, and it sat on the edge of a very large ocean, very large shallow ocean that was warm. And when this cataclysm happened, when these things happened in our solar system where there was fighting going on, it affected Mars, and the atmosphere was torn away. Valles Marineris was created. It's like a large gash, bigger and deeper than the Grand Canyon, was created during this time. And so they had pulled much of the race off as much as they could, and then moved them over here. And that would be a rendition of the Maya, a rendition of the Olmec, and it would basically be a lot of these races that would have been in Peru up into central Mexico in that area.
Okay, so your data then, the remote viewing data you did on that Mayan civilization, or what was once a Martian civilization that left, that matches a declassified document, a CIA document that talked about a remote viewing experiment that they commissioned in 1984, and it turned out that Joseph McMoneagle and Skip Atwater ran that experiment, and they found that pretty much what you described, that there was a cataclysm, and that there were a few survivors that were scrambling to get on these giant kind of space ark type ships that would transport them to a tropical planet, which was presumably Earth.
Which is Earth, yeah. Yep, yeah, no, this is, I know it's hard for people to believe, but our history is so deep, it's so long. The Earth's history is so deep and it's so long. Like normally on other planets, in other solar systems, more often than not, races understand that there are others that are living out there, and they will come in and interact with them, and they will trade with them, and they will bring them goods, and they will share things. That is the normal construct of living in a galactic neighborhood. And unfortunately, we have been completely, utterly, totally squished down with an MK Ultra narrative on something that doesn't make any sense for one thing, and is damaging to the human psyche on the other hand too. So I think we're in a really terrible situation now with the suppression of this type of information.
Now, with that CIA experiment and what you did, it was looking at this kind of ancient civilization on Mars. You're connecting it to the Mayans. Others have connected it to Egypt and Cairo and all of that. But is this where remote viewing really excels, when you're looking at kind of like events that are happening around you or in the past, that the remote viewing process is not going to interfere too much with what's being viewed, as opposed to those that are using remote viewing to look into the future, and they give all kinds of policy prescriptions, or what's about to happen, RV the future, and so can you kind of comment about that? Because I think it's important to distinguish between the remote viewing that's done that is most accurate, more likely to be accurate, as opposed to that which is very speculative, maybe front loading.
Right. Well, so the way we do things is that the remote viewers are always blind, right? In other words, they don't know what it is they're going to look at. They're given a number that's associated with something they're to look at, and then they take that number and they just go through their methodology, whatever that is. So that keeps the viewer from making stuff up and confabulation and all this stuff. So then we have never just use one remote viewer. So we always have a team of remote viewers, and then they all get tasked on the same thing. You get their information back. They still don't know what it is until you tell them. Sometimes you don't tell them for a little bit because you want to do a bit more on it. And then you go through an analysis process of lining up all the corroborative data between the sessions, which paints a very accurate picture. Now, one of the problems that we do have in remote viewing is that if you have a big, huge unknown, a big, huge aspect that is maybe an esoteric thing, or a high technology, alien technology thing that you really don't have the vocabulary or understanding for, it can be difficult to truly understand and come to the correct, super correct, detailed conclusion on it. You can come to more of a high level understanding conclusion on it, but you can't get into the things that you don't actually understand. So that can be an issue when dealing with the more esoteric stuff, or the things that seem like magic to us. The other thing too is that the future, when you get into the future is never set. Even if a psychic or a remote viewer tells you that this is the data that they got about something in the future, there are all these things that are still going to impact the potential future event. Because if you think of it like this, if you think of the double slit experiment, where they shoot a photon through a slit, and when they're normally, or two slits, normally the photons would go and hit the back of the wall in two bright lines. But sometimes the photons will create an interference pattern, right? Now, an interference pattern would be like waves across the back. And so this is something in the double slit experiment that really confused scientists when they first saw this, because a photon to them is a piece of matter. So how can a piece of matter act like a wave and a particle at the same time, right? So it's interfering with itself in order to create the wave on the back of the wall. Now, when they put an observer there to watch to see what the photon did before it would go through the slits, it stopped doing the interference pattern. So they collapsed the wave function, right? They collapsed the wave function at that moment. Now think of the remote viewer as the person who is the observer of a quantum event. Think of the wave function on the back wall as all the events in the world that can possibly happen at that future place and time. When the remote viewer looks at it, they collapse the wave function into the most probable event that they can see, that they can describe at that moment in time. But the wave function still goes on when they leave, right? The wave function will come back because there's other influences there, and there are other things that are going to cause it to shift and change and move, right? So the closer you are in time, though, to the actual event, the more accurate the remote viewing data is going to be. But in my opinion, it's very disingenuous to say that future-based remote viewing data is accurate, just in general, because of the whole nature of the way the quantum world works. It's the observer.
More relevant to remote viewing of the future as opposed to remote viewing of the past or what's happening in the contemporary era.
Right. Now, I mean, the thing about it's like you can, okay, so aliens, some aliens, not all aliens, non-human intelligences, astral beings, some humans, very conscious, aware humans, they can all feel when they're being remote viewed, right? In fact, the more astral type as well as specific aliens, if you remote view them, they can end up visiting you. Like they can end up visiting you. I've had experiences where I've been visited before for remote viewing an alien species. And this is something that does happen to remote viewers on occasion. They have a broader awareness. So remote viewing, think about it too. Like, okay, so if you're viewing a past history event, could you potentially, just by the act of viewing, influence it? For sure you can. Yeah, I truly believe you can. Because if a conscious being can recognize you remote viewing them, you can also have some kind of energetic impact on a past event, something that already occurred.
So that would be, so if you remote view the past, Atlantis or whatever, and you're there seeing things, someone notices you there, they would notice you and they might think, well, you're an angel or a spirit, and whatever they get from that interaction might have an influence on events.
It could have an influence, but here, okay, so listen to this. So this is something that happened, this must have been like maybe 5 years, 6 years, 7 years ago, in that general time frame. I don't remember exactly when it happened. So like I have been asked throughout my career to often provide some counter-terror work, right? Because somebody in some agency has an idea that something may happen somewhere, right? And so, okay, now in this particular instance, it was requested that in the tasking for the remote viewers that, all right, let me first describe what a normal tasking on this looks like. It would look something like this written down. Describe the next attack on US soil by such and such group, right? Or you can pick the next attack in this city by such and such group, right? So that's a normal tasking around this kind of stuff. When you task a remote viewer on that, they will get, if there's going to be an attack, they will get bombs, blood, guts. If it's like, open-ended in time, eventually there's going to be an attack in the whole of the United States, right? So that's what was asked. But there was a request that said, well, can you place in front of that without affecting any event? Describe the next terrorist attack? Without affecting any event, describe the next terrorist attack on US soil, right? So, okay, did that. All the data came back as like a man riding a horse, sunset in the desert, people just not doing anything, just kind of like meandering about in the desert scene. And I'm like, this is really curious. This is really interesting because this is open-ended in time on the tasking, and it seems like, we get something. Okay, so I took that front part off, without affecting any event. All the data comes back as blood, guts, bombs, bullets. It's violent. It's like what you would normally expect to see in one of these things when you're asked to do something like this. So because of that, what that is showing us is that the remote viewer subconscious, they're not told this, right? This is blind. You write it down on a piece of paper, you write a number with it, you only give them the number. But the remote viewer subconscious knows that it's going to affect the scene. It's going to affect whatever happens there. So it bounced out of it. It bounced out of it. It bounced off of it so that it wouldn't affect it, because it was asked to not affect it, right? So this is a case in point, for me at least. Like, they won't view it if you ask them not to affect it.
I see. Okay. That makes sense. Now, one of the episodes you did was Immortals Inside the Earth. So you want to tell us about that?
Oh, that was a while ago, that one. Yeah, I think that had to do with some Chinese stories. Some Chinese stories where these people who were mining, one person who was with a group of other people mining disappeared. And that's actually a bunch of stories like this. Disappeared and then showed up later on. And what's so interesting when we remote view this stuff is that, right, okay, so they come back with a story, but what's of like meeting immortals and living in this land, it's like a Shambhala type place. But what's interesting when we remote view this stuff is that, like, there are these places underground, especially when you get into very highly specifically mineralized type places, maybe like you're looking at some type of quartz construct, like creating a piezoelectric charge. There are earth energies running through it. There's mining going on, that they can create these doorways underground into other locations. And I think that, like, a lot of the ideas about Shambhala relate to this type of construct that has happened to people, where they have gone through basically a portal. Let's just call it a portal. And I think that, like, what we saw with the remote viewing data on this stuff, on a couple of these stories, was that that's exactly what it was. They were mining underground. A person gets pulled through into a different reality, into a different dimension, and they exist there for a period of time, and then they get pushed back out. Very interesting stuff.
Now, I don't know if you have read the Radu Cinema book series where he talks about inner Earth civilizations, but he did describe Shambhala as kind of like being deep inside of the Earth, that the Earth has these kind of concentric layers of different densities. As you go deeper and deeper into the Earth, you go higher and higher into densities, and that Shambhala is a place kind of like the very high density inside the interior of the Earth, and the beings there are kind of virtually immortal. But then you have other beings closer to the surface that inhabit civilizations that kind of like still maintain connections with surface humanity or surface, like they have a sister city, like in Romania, you might have Bucharest, and then you have an inner city that's kind of like a sister city.
Yeah, they're like
Uh,
dimensional sister cities or something.
yeah,
But it's like
and they're
they're
connected by portals.
right, and they're in like a maybe a slightly different frequency as well, but like they also bleed through to each other at the same time. And that's like
Mm.
one of the things, the really interesting thing that we've seen in remote viewing data around portal constructs. So some areas have these places where strange things will show up on a regular basis. And I've been in some of these locations and I've had weird experiences in these locations. And a lot of times what we see is that it's like these two-dimensional worlds, like sister cities, are like in this state of flux between each other. And then sometimes all the energy aligns to mash them together. And in that moment, you can see all sorts of weird things, different creatures. You can have a vision of a city in front of you, and then it'll pull apart and it will go through the process again and it'll come together. And it's like these environmental conditions or these mineralization conditions that end up creating these things that happen, and the doorways, portals to these other locations.
Yeah, it truly is fascinating, these portals, and
Yeah.
I guess as we kind of go through this awakening process on the planet, that'll become more and more significant as people
Right.
find them and learn how to activate them. Now, one of the other incidents that you remote viewed was the Las Vegas alien incident. And so, what did you find out about that particular incident, which is still very controversial? People are on both sides of the argument whether it's real or a hoax.
Yeah.
What did you find?
The whole thing of that was that we had in our data descriptions of this craft that was in trouble, and it like hit the atmosphere, or hit something wrong, and it got like a hole blown in it, or in its engine, or in a protection field, and it basically came and had to land wherever it was. Now, in the stories of what people saw, the police had seen this thing streaking through the sky. Other people had seen a thing streaking through the sky, and then the people in the neighborhood said, they called the police and said that there's a UFO in their yard, and there are very tall beings coming out of the ship. So they're not making it up. At least according to our data, they're not making it up. This truly did happen. This craft landed. They were more on the reptilian side of beings. And this craft had to land there, and they had to try to fix whatever was wrong and get it out of there as soon as humanly possible, or alienly possible. And so one of the beings had taken off to get outside of the whole neighborhood area, to get farther out into the desert, and to act as somewhat of a beacon, or put some type of technology out there to redirect the craft, because they had fixed it in a way that it would be like, it would basically can do some rudimentary flight and camouflage, and do some, and be able to beacon it out to a location where they could be safe and fully repair the craft. And so that's basically what we got with that whole situation, that whole scenario. And so the people, when they have the video of the shadow that's moving by the fence, and that's actually one of the beings. That's actually one of the beings, because they were using a type of technological camouflage on themselves in order to hide from people's eyes. But that's what it looked like on the camera, as this shadow that was moving, and that's actually one of the aliens.
Wow. Okay. So that was a genuine incident, and
Yeah.
the aliens were able to, I guess, repair their ship and take off
Well,
and do whatever it is they were to do.
they're based here. Like, okay, to them, they wouldn't consider themselves aliens because they live here. They live here underground. They're not. They wouldn't consider themselves aliens. No.
Okay, so are they a crypto-terrestrial species? I mean, when you're talking about living here, have they been here a long time, or are they just like off-world aliens with a base here?
They're off-world aliens who have been living here for a long time with a base here, who feel that they have a claim to this place.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Did you get a sense of how many there were?
At least on this ship, there were 3.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah. But they were taller and gray-like reptile-like. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
So we wouldn't consider them among the friendly ET races.
No.
Okay.
No, definitely not.
Okay, well, I guess that takes us to the tunnels of LA and the lizard people. So yeah, tell us about that one.
I honestly don't remember that one. Gosh, I don't remember what we have on that one. I think that had to do a little bit with the same type of construct, the same type of group, right? I mean, a lot of this stuff gets blown completely out of proportion in the stories as they go through time, but they always quite often have a kernel of truth with them, and they relate to beings that are basically like living here and have been here for a very long time, who feel that they have a claim over this place, and actually a claim over the people, the people creatures that are here, and they are living in locations that are deep underground. And you know, that's the other thing too. I mean, when you get to LA, Hollywood, that whole area, you have there's like deep underground in that area, you have catacombs and caves and tons of stuff because of the way that shelf is under California. I think it goes all the way into Nevada, right? And so you have tons of locations and areas underneath that shelf for beings to live in. And we always find that deep underground in caves, there are things and beings there that we know nothing about. Nothing about. Us surface dwellers only encompass a very small area of what our planet can actually hold, right? Just in general. So yeah, while I don't completely 100% remember the data on that stuff, I mean, there are
Okay, so
lizard people under the ground.
right, well, and that kind of brings us to these stories, like the Vedic stories about the
Right.
Nagas. You know, we talked about the kind of serpent beings associated with kind of like the
Yeah,
Mayan or
Quetzalcoatl,
the
yeah,
Quetzalcoatl.
right.
So yes, I guess it's very plausible that you can actually have an extensive tunnel system under a major city like Los Angeles, and some reptilian race or beings there.
I mean, you know, the weird part is that, like, I used to do a lot of work like in the Mount Shasta area, investigating that. And one of the things, so there have been some weird disappearances around Mount Shasta, and we've looked at missing people before, and normally it's pretty conventional, where a person goes missing because they want to go missing, or they were abducted, they want to commit suicide, they want to disappear, right? Or they get hurt and they die. Okay, normal. Those are the normal things. And there was a couple in Mount Shasta that we looked at of people that went missing that were taken by these types of things that live in the cave systems and underground all around that mountain. Not on the mountain, Mount Shasta itself, because there's something different going on there, but all around the mountain, like Pluto's cave area and all the caves that you have there, these things are existing in there, and occasionally they will take people because they have a specific genetic marker that they're looking for.
Fascinating. Now, this mystery drone phenomenon is really sweeping, not only the United States, but also parts of Europe, England. They're appearing over military bases, all sorts of stories about them, about their origins. So what do you know about the mystery drone phenomenon that's happening now?
Yeah, this is kind of interesting. This is like an ongoing project that I'm working on. There's just seems to be more to know about it. And a huge aspect of this is like an unknown. And so trying to understand the data and put it into some kind of construct or narrative is great, very grain of salt, right? So anything that I say about this at this point, it's like very grain of salt, but I'll lay out for you like what I am seeing in the data. So, all right. Okay, so first off, you know what it's not because of the psychological operations. The first thing that you have to think about if you're going to go down this ontological path are what are the psychological operations about this? Because this is a big psychological operation in part. It's being used on that front. So it's not China. It's not China. China is being used in the media as it's just a psyop. It's being used by some politicians in order to get money for some things. It's been used to scare people into certain ways of thinking. It's not okay. So then you have somebody come along and say, "Oh, it's nothing. It's okay. Everything's fine. No, don't worry about it. It's nothing." Then you have another person come along and say it's the Russians. Then you have another person come along and say that it's a very dangerous situation and we don't know what to do about it. So basically what they're trying to do is confuse and muddy the waters with a bunch of different ideas about things so people don't know what is up or down with it, right? So we know it's not all that stuff because the media is not truthful, because the media is run by people that want to do a psyop, especially when it comes to the UAP stuff. The other part of this on the psyop side is that there is a battle to take control of UFO versus UAP. UFO has baggage around it, alien baggage that wants to be gotten rid of. And part of this is also, all these things are just opportunities around the edges of what's really going on, right? So UAP is used for, now we have to associate UAP with potential military drones, right? So this is to really like grab the narrative and pull it off of the alien UFO construct as well. Now, what are we talking about here? What do we get in the data? The data talks about frequencies. The data talks a lot about frequencies. There are two different things happening. There's a frequency that there are frequencies in devices that are embedded in the ground, and there are frequencies in the air that are trying to understand what those frequencies are and disrupt those frequencies, right? So decode, decipher, and then disrupt. Now, if you've noticed, there have been some videos coming out of people in those areas who are showing like video of their microwave clocks or electricity or stuff like that, going crazy, going haywire. People that are having odd events happening that seem to be electromagnetic in nature. So this is specifically related to the drones, as the drones are trying to understand what these other frequencies are and then interfere with them. Okay, so something in the ground's emitting frequencies. The drones are brought in. The drones are U.S. military drones. Some of them have alien or non-human intelligence technology associated with them. In the interior, some of them do, some of them don't. But these drones, these drones are basically scanning and looking for and trying to understand where these signals are coming from. Now, what we see, so then we have to go, okay, so what's going on here? Like what sort of signals are happening here and who's doing it? So when we look at that, the signals are things, they're devices that have been embedded into the ground in very specific places in order to form these network grids that are used for monitoring, which is say like plate shifts, planetary plate shifts, monitoring water levels, monitoring everything environmental. And they're being set up in these grid-like networks that the military and these like black op groups that has non-human intelligence as well, that are coming in because they detected these signals to try to figure out what it is and then block it. These devices, these things have been put in place by non-human intelligence. This is what's in the data. This is a non-human intelligence, alien type thing who has come in and placed stuff in the ground in various locations where they have decided they want to monitor because, and what we're talking about in the data is like major shifts. Like we're talking about like plates, like on the planet, crust shifting, earthquakes, water moving to great degrees. We're talking about the monitoring of some type of perceived cataclysm, ultimately, some type of perceived cataclysm. And this black ops, big part of a black ops military unit has gone in because they picked up these signals and they're trying to figure out what it is, decipher it, and then block it. And that's what we get so far with what the drone situation is.
Okay, so it sounds like the mystery drones then are kind of a largely benign operation by the military or the positive branch of the military using alien reverse engineered technology to kind of like get a sense of, what is happening with these frequencies and how that might relate to some kind of earth changes or cataclysm.
Right. I don't know if the Black Ops site is positive or negative. All I know is that these frequencies are like embedded. They're kind of hiding in plain sight. Like they're embedded on the back of other frequencies that are happening. And they had noticed the patterns in these other frequencies because that's a lot of what they will do. Like in order to detect UFOs or things with anti-gravity type propulsion systems, they have a disruptive energy field that you can measure as it hits other energy fields. And so they're always monitoring energy fields that the planet has and that humans create in order to watch for any disturbances. And so when they see those disturbances they send in all these drones that are picking up the signals, and they're literally trying to like track and figure it out what it is. Now, I don't know if they're positive or negative. I don't get any negative thing from the devices that are placed in the ground from the non-human intelligence side. I get more of a construct of them waiting for a major cataclysm they expect to happen, and they want to see if they can get data from that to understand it as it's going through its process and potentially help slow things down to stop it.
So what do you think of this strange Cybertruck bomb incident in Las Vegas in front of a Trump Tower where the guy that was found inside it, Matthew Livelsberger, was a active Green Beret and apparently released a email manifesto that was then shown on or released on the Sean Ryan show, and he talked about these drones, these mystery drones, actually belonging to China, and that they were coming in off a submarine.
They are coming off the water. They are coming out of the water. Yep, that's for sure. Yep, okay. Yep.
Now, but I personally, having kind of like explored it more, I don't believe that they're being sent by the Chinese government. I think it's more like a deep state or a dark faction of the controllers that are using their Chinese assets, their Chinese-built assets, or maybe a Chinese submarine to launch these things. So they might be trying to like really start a war, because that seems to be pretty provocative, flying these over.
Well, that's one of the psyops around it. Like so like all of these things are what's happening right now is opportunity by all of these deep state type people to use aspects of it for psychological operations. But the whole truth of it has to do with non-human technology that is in the ground that they're trying to figure out. These other things are not truly what it's about, but they are being used as potential avenues to do what they want to do. And that's one of them. One of them is to go to war with China or Russia or somebody like that. It's one of those psyops around it. And that guy, that blew up the Cybertruck. While we don't look at this kind of stuff normally with remote viewing, I believe this is just part of the psyop, just another aspect of the psyop. He had shot himself and blew up the car at the same moment or something, according to their story. There's just so much weird stuff around it. I'm having a hard time swallowing a lot of it. And then after he was dead, apparently, he had Signal, his safety number changed in Signal, which, I don't know, there's weird stuff going on. And so I look at all of this stuff as just a big, huge psychological operation, because for one thing, the symbology of a Cybertruck on fire in front of the Trump Tower is something that one side, the deep state, really would love people to just keep in their heads, right?
Right, exactly.
Might as well throw some other stuff in there too to get people to go off into other psyops.
All right. So are there any kind of projects that you're working on now, or upcoming episodes on
you know what? So what I've really gotten into these hyper local type stories where I find really fascinating, like culturally throughout the United States, you have a lot of towns that have their legends that can be passed down from generation to generation, and they're very cultural to the region that they're in, and they have this flavor of sort of a paranormal Americana type thing. And so I've really been going through a lot of these stories. For instance, it's on the Oregon coast, you have something called Bandage Man, who was a logger, who, it's all related to their culture. He was a logger who got hurt in a logging accident, and on the ambulance, he died. And then, even though he was dead, he ran out of the ambulance. He's all covered in bandages, and he's out attacking and haunting people on these lonely logging roads in the forest. And people claim, they've seen him, from the 1950s all the way up to now, right? Bandage Man is out there, but it's such a weird, cultural thing that only happens in this one area. And then you go to another town and they have their other cultural, strange, paranormally high strangeness type thing. So what I've been doing actually lately is collecting all these stories to set them up for remote viewing, because they do have this strange hyper local cultural thing going on, and my need to want to understand what the true reality is behind these stories. So it's actually a huge project, and that's what I've been working on lately. I don't have any data yet on it. I'm just getting the information together.
Right. So where do people go, John, if they want to watch some of your episodes on metaphysical or
oh yeah, you can find that on rise.tv, metaphysical, and then I've got Chronicles of the Psychic Spy there. You can also find Metaphysical on YouTube. I've got a couple videos. I've got a YouTube channel, Hemispheres Institute Remote Viewing. I've got some videos there as well. I haven't posted there in a very long time because I've been focused on the metaphysical side. So yeah, and I've got my website, hemispheres.institute, and I teach remote viewing, so you can learn it. It's fun.
Awesome. Okay, well, I want to thank you, John, for being on Exopolitics today, and
thank you. Always awesome being with you.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.